So the Adecco Group Foundation was established in 2017, and originally it was set up not as a granting foundation, but really as a social innovation lab. So we did inherit some of the long-term programs from the group, and our job there was to kind of build them up, put more strategy and structure around them, and then figure out where they could go in terms of a successful home, where they could really thrive. And at the same time, we built from scratch the Social Innovation Lab, which is a way to use design thinking and research and collaboration to tackle some of the really tough issues around the future of work. And so now we actually have just received a new mandate from the board where we will completely be the Social Innovation Lab from the beginning of 2022. And the lab is based around 3 different pieces: scan, build, and scale. So SCAN is a landscape scanning mechanism that uses a combination of research and data and then expert insights to help us figure out who's falling out of the workforce and why are they falling out. And then the findings from that go into the research agenda of the foundation, but also they help us decide which projects to do, which of those challenges are we going to solve, and what kind of solution do we want to come up with. So then build is the projects, and the projects are usually, say, 12 to 18 months. And they use design thinking. They pull together a very multi-stakeholder group to then come together and understand more deeply what the problems are and who the personas are that we're solving for. Then to use that collaboration and that co-creation to come up with possible new solutions. It might be an app, a platform, a training program, a campaign, in order to solve that particular problem. Then at the end of the project, we've got, say, 3 to 6 possible prototypes. And then the prototypes go into the last phase, which is scale. And this is an accelerator. We're building it right now. An accelerator to take those prototypes and build them into actual products, working with partners. And then the partners take them out into the world. So the example we like to use is what we're doing with the Lucerne Festival now. So with the Lucerne Festival, we were very interested in how musicians are prepared for the world of work. And often they'll fall out because it's hard to make a living as a musician or any kind of artist. And so we scanned how they were prepared, particularly young musicians, what they got, what they didn't get in terms of training for the world of work. That was the scan. Then in the build, we created a bespoke training program for young musicians. And we piloted this in the Lucerne Festival Academy. And then we piloted also with the Davos Festival Academy. So we tested in 2 different of these festivals. And we figured out what worked and what didn't work. And we retooled until we got something we felt was a really, really good working prototype. And so now we're in the scale phase where we're ready to hand this off to an external organization, the Lucerne Festival, or potentially a consortium of organizations in the arts world, where we have selected a cohort of their own alumni and trained them to be trainers so they can deliver the content. We have honed that content and also the Train the Trainer program. We've created assets to be able to tell the story as well. We've created a business plan. What does it take to actually run a program like this? What are the resources that would be needed? And then we've created a pipeline of what other kinds of organizations might be interested in this. And so then, when we do this handover, then they get that whole package and we do this pivot so that we become the supporting organization and then the arts organizations become the leaders. And so that's what makes it sustainable. It's not us taking it out into the world, it's someone with the credibility in that community taking it out into the world. And so this is what we want to continue to replicate: the scan, the build, the scale, to tackle those big issues that can't be solved by a single entity alone, but rather need that multi-stakeholder consortium kind of approach to come up with something that's really sticky, that's built from the ground up with end users, and that we think will have the kind of impact that we want. So the radar basically scans who's falling out and why. When we ran the first radar round, the board wanted us to look specifically at youth. So we're looking at youth, but not all youth. We're looking at youth who are NEET, which is not in employment, education, or training. And then we narrowed that to youth between, say, 16 and 19, because at that point you have completed compulsory education. And if you fall out, it's much harder to get back in. And there are studies about how it impacts your lifelong earning as well. And then we looked at that, and then that group and living at or below the poverty line. And then we looked at, even beyond that, young mothers, with the idea that if you can solve for a relatively extreme use case, whatever works with that population will likely work for everybody else. So this is the current live project that we have right now. And we're doing pilots in Mexico and France, specifically on that youth demographic, but it's youth at risk. And then whatever we come up with to solve that youth at risk piece will likely work for other youth. So the specific challenge that we're working on that one is about this real or perceived choice that young people have to make. Either I continue my education or I earn a living and I support my family. And so we find that usually it's one or the other, and usually the make money piece wins out. And a lot of young people will drop out in those situations. And so what we would like is to figure out what would be the unlock to help young people understand that they can earn and they can learn at the same time. And it's often about awareness and perception of ways to combine the two. It's not that the solutions don't exist already. So we're looking for, how do you reconnect the pipes? So that's the project that's live now, and we'll actually have prototypes out of that by about mid-year this year. The second demographic that we're looking at, and we're just starting the radar number 2 right now, is women coming back into the workforce. Because what we saw is that women dropped out in higher numbers at the beginning of the pandemic, and they're not coming back in at the rates that were expected. So what we're interested in is the fact that women are not coming back into the workforce indicative of deeper problems, challenges to women coming back into the workforce. And what we're interested in also is not necessarily, the highly educated professional executive women who have stepped out and maybe are struggling to come back in. Yes, that is definitely an issue, but there's a lot of work out there to help that demographic. What we're interested in is who's not served, who doesn't have the programs to help them, who doesn't have the awareness, who doesn't have the access. And so that's where the next piece will be. And then we just had approved by the board the third demographic they'll look at, and that's actually what we're calling silver workers, or the kind of 50, 55 plus. And looking at, particularly women in that demographic, and what are the reasons that they're actually struggling to change jobs or struggling to get back in, maybe after an even longer absence. What are the implications of the caring economy as well? Because you get to 50, 55 plus, and you're probably not only caring for children, maybe your children are slightly older, you're often caring for elderly parents or other relatives. So there are all these things that come into play about why a particular demographic might have a hard time getting into or staying in work. And so then we'll continue to run the radar, looking at different topics and figure out, are there commonalities there as well? What is common between young people, women coming back in, older workers? And I think we'll see a lot of similar themes. And then we can look at solutions that might be cross-cutting as well. So I think it's very important that you look beyond kind of the typical definitions of inclusion. So often when you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, you get a lot of discussion about gender, geography, maybe ethnicity, sometimes language group. But what we've tried to do, at least within my own team, and definitely also within the Adecco group, is to look more broadly at what diversity really means. And so yes, gender, yes, geography, yes, things like sexual orientation. But in addition to that, we also need what we talk about as cognitive diversity. You need diversity of thought, diversity of approaches. You need diversity also of backgrounds, areas of study, areas of expertise, just fundamental ways of looking at the world. And so within my team, we've made sure that we get people who have come from different sectors, different areas of study, different parts of the world for sure, but also with different areas of expertise and things like age and disability and language background and cultural background, and that all of this gives us the building blocks to then craft the culture that we want and the way that we want to work together. And so it's a very kind of innovation-driven, flexible, agile kind of community, and that's the way we want to work within our team and with our stakeholders. And you can't do that unless you have that kind of cognitive diversity. Otherwise, you have that risk of groupthink, too much of the same approach, and you don't have that dynamic kind of riffing off one another that you get with a truly diverse team. So this is interesting because we've tried to create that kind of way of working within my own team, and then we make sure that we mirror that when we work with our external partners. So we work with corporate clients, we work with partner organizations, we work with academic institutions, think tanks, etc. We find that sometimes they've got a real appetite to work in that way, and they're going through that same kind of change internally, and then it's very quick. But in other cases, it's foreign to them. They're not used to working that way. And so then we have to kind of scale back and do it bit by bit and bring them on the journey and like introduce it little by little. So for example, we did this fairly long intervention with a big international relief and development organization. And they were not so used to working in that very flexible, agile, show the imperfect work, go away, come back kind of way. So we actually did this through a series of workshops with them. And then we pulled people in who already had this interest. And then by the end of a couple of workshops, then they were working differently and they were starting to echo back more of that language. And then we find that they're using more of those tools, not just from us, but from others as well, in the way they plan, in the way they're taking their organization forward. So some of it's modeling, some of it is introduction, just exposure, and then also rewarding that this is the way we want to work. This is the kind of relationship, the kind of partnership that we want. And it also helps when you're moving away from a very transactional relationship to truly a collaborative partnership relationship. Then you can actually insert that culture and the way of working along the way. So I like to think about our organization, particularly the team, as kind of a training ground. So that we actually, if we can model this and we can get really good at these kinds of ways of interacting, then as people move out of the team and go into other teams within the Adecco group or other parts, sub-parts of the group, or out into other organizations, they're taking this kind of as ambassadors. They're the vectors of the change out into the world. So the more we can embed this in the way we work and the way our products and the things that we create out of the Social Innovation Lab are created, then the more we can actually influence this as we send our own people out into the world, either to work with partners or actually to join partners as well.